Q&A only 15 minutes. That's why we keep the questions to only one, not two. So please ask one question at a time. We start from Behran.
Should I go ahead? I would say this movie was as much about love and faith. I think that it was about time. The clock stops and then it goes to and then it goes ahead again at the end. But I didn't see any elaboration from your side about time. But what would it do? I mean, you didn't, and
Sure.
you know, there's much about time. Reference is about something that if I could stop the time, I would do that. This is the only thing that you cannot do. But in a sense, basically Marianne stopped the time and took everything back because she goes away. And we don't know, maybe everything is going back to regional before there wasn't Marianne. So is there something you want to add to this about time?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, there's only so much time
Yes,
to give the talk, and so you have to pick and choose the elements. No, absolutely. I think it fits in with what I'm saying. It's the way I think about the issue of time in the film, which is that you know, the miracle on one hand stands outside of time. We're not in real time. Okay, at least we're not in clock time. Time that can be measured by the movement of the clock, 1 second after another second. Okay, as I think it was your name Lily. As Lily said, you know, you're in the moment, right? And those moments are expansive and explosive. There's something kind of real about time in this film. You feel the passage of time. The camera just sits there and it sits there and it sits there and it sits there, right? You feel the presence of time, but as I was trying to point out, it's also manufactured, right? The passage of time is not, you know, like in the opening sequence is the best example. I mean, that's time. It's the marker of our day, okay? And yet, what we saw is impossible, right? So I think the film is always playing on that relationship of we are in time. We're timely beings. We live in time, okay? But there's something about these experiences, love, fidelity, forgiveness, which explode time, which can't be measured by the clock, but they don't, you know, they don't happen in heaven, right? Outside of time and eternity. They happen in time.
If we go in the world of Nietzschean beyond good and evil, not judge if whatever is happening is good or bad. If we try to go into the pure feeling of commitment versus love and feeling of a person. As Eric Fromm says, that you can learn how to love, you can reinforce love, or you can step back if you can see that socially there's problems. In that kind of a realm, do you think that the person, I think it was Nancy or something that you quoted from, that said love is just happens?
Yeah.
Do you, I kind of disagree with that. I'm more into a Eric Fromm kind of a feeling that in a society, although we all have feelings constantly,
sure,
but that feeling is checked by reinforcing it or not reinforcing it depending on what's happening in our lives. Do you agree with that or not?
Yeah, I do, and I think, I mean, I can't speak for Nelsie personally, but I don't see that as inconsistent with the claim he made. He's simply giving a kind of phenomenological account of just that one dimension of love. That there's of course, you know, we learn how to love. You know, we learn, you know, we all come with the baggage and unconscious preferences and so on that certainly affect and filter and frame the way that we experience love in the world. But I think all Nelsie is trying to say is that even with all that baggage, there's still a dimension of love which pierces it, which pops that. Because when one feels love for the other, again, you can't will it, right? You can't just, you know, you can't look at someone and say, okay, I'm going to make myself love that person or make them love me. You can't. You can't make someone love you, right? It either comes or it doesn't. Right? Now, of course, there's training, and I think he would agree with that. I mean, he talks at other parts in the lecture about kind of what commitment means in loving somebody and the kind of work, the labor of love. And I don't think he disputes that. But it's really just this moment that, love has to, in order for it to make sense as an idea, it can't be something that you create. It can't be a product of your will. It can't be, even though you can will it, and reaffirm it and so on, you can't just concoct it, right? It's not up to me to make love.
Because of time, again, I give room to 5 more people, and then we start a new section.
I want to go back to the topic of otherness that you brought up. I think it's an interesting model, but either you didn't complete that model for me, or maybe for others, but or the model can't explain some part of the narrative or the story, because when you talk about other, there is also the opposite concept of self and identity and self-consciousness. And I can understand that very well with your explanation, which was great. I think the presentation was very interesting. But I can understand that through the distance that the audience gets from the characters. And they're all forgiving, and they're all God, and they're all other with your presentation, with your explanation. I can understand that, right? So they're all forgiving, and they're all others for me as an audience, and I can't identify myself with them. So there is an identity of myself, and there is an other. And that's very interesting. And also the idea of the language that you said we cannot understand what they're saying, and we cannot understand, that's part of the movie. That constructs an otherness for me. But in terms of the story, we are also watching a movie, right? You're also watching a story. How come those characters are identifying with each other, they're loving each other, and at the same time they're not there? Some of them might be real, some of them are dead. So I don't understand the concept of others creating that otherness in terms of the story between them, right? They seem all to be something that they're all the same, and we don't see any character to them. This one.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I guess the way I see it, and I guess what I was trying to present, is that the 3 main characters there are others to each other, right? Johann, in loving his wife, within the immediacy of his context, it breaks down. Okay, but what does reaffirming that love mean? Right? Where does the reaffirmation come from? Now, he loves Marianne. Where does that come from? The characters in the film, attribute to it a kind of transcendental source, God or the devil. Where does the forgiveness come from? Out of the unhappiness that you might feel at someone being unfaithful to you, how do you forgive after that? Right? Hannah Arendt talks a lot about the power of forgiveness in this regard. If you're caught within the dynamic of the two of you, and within the unhappiness of that dynamic, right? Where does the move to forgive actually come from? Right? I think what Arendt talks about, and I think what the film suggests in its way, is it's a kind of transcendental moment. Now again, it's not literally transcendental, and Zeus doesn't zap lightning down or something like that. These characters find the capacity to move on, but that capacity is not explicable within the closedness of the dynamic. And I think the film, uses all this kind of miraculous imagery to sort of visually, metaphorically suggest the miracle that the forgiveness is. Right? And so there's a relation to the other who comes from where? Right? I mean, where does Marianne's ability to kiss Esther come from? Right? Where does Esther's look of gratitude to Marianne come from?
It's still somewhat confusing, but I'll talk to
Okay.
about that in the discussion.
Sure.
Hey, Ma.
Thank you very much. So question is, you mentioned that the subtitle was a part of the movie, and intentionally the director didn't want anybody to understand what they're talking about. So I just wondering, was the reason that he chose to use the Mennonite community as the background for his story, or is there any other reason that he chose this Mennonite community to make this film?
And that's one of the reasons. The other reason that he gives, you know, and you always have to wonder about artists in terms of the sincerity of their answers to these explanations of these sorts of things and whether they themselves fully comprehend everything they're doing. I don't think artists do always fully comprehend what they're doing. And that's not a criticism. I think it's just, you know, I didn't entirely know everything I was going to say in my presentation when I wrote it. So I think artists are in the same boat. The other reason he gives is that he wanted everything to be as plain as possible. Right? So this is a community, you know, there's no social factors, there's no apparent politics involved. People look the same, they dress the same. You know, Marianne is not like some sex-pot femme fatale in distinction to his wife, who might be some boring housewife or something like that, the way, you know, a Hollywood story might depict it, okay? Everybody is the same, visually, right? It's very closed, you know, there's not a lot of elements in the film. So he says he wanted that simply so that the issues would be all that there is to deal with.
Actually, I have a question. First, thank you for your presentation. In one scene, Mariana, she blocked the sun, and for me, sun was the symbol of truth. And at that scene, my impression was that she wanted to block the truth. But in the scene afterwards, she kissed the woman and she woke up. So I have some paradox between these two scenes.
So what's the paradox?
Because in one paradox for me, she was somehow is a devil. She blocked the sun. But in the scene afterwards, she kissed the lady and she woke up.
She's kind of the source of light.
Exactly.
Right.
So I cannot understand this paradox.
Okay, what if we strip the associations you have with the character away for a second and just think about this idea of the sun being blocked?
Mm-hmm.
You know, versus all the, you know, versus the film makes a big deal about the sun in general. The sunrise, the sunset, the sun glares that we see on the screen, on the lens, okay? The title, Silent Light, okay? The film's very concerned about light and the sun. And it's not always, you know, I've already indicated, it's not, you know, it's not clear that what you're seeing is what you're seeing when you're watching the film. There's many illusions of light that we see in the film, and that the film makes explicit for us. Okay, again, the example of the flower that comes into focus. It's a trick of light, right? You move a piece of glass back and forward, okay, in relationship to an object, the light will hit the lens, and that's the illusion that you see, okay? So I think this idea of blocking the light, you know, it's powerful symbolically. I mean, it's a kind of eclipse, right? She's an eclipse of the light, but as you said, she's also a source of light. So what does it mean to say that that which blocks the light is that which gives the light? Okay? I've talked about the lens in the screen, right? The screen is that which gives us light, and it blocks light. That's how it works, right? Camera lenses do the same thing. They block some stuff, and they reveal some stuff. His next film, Post Tenebris Lux, he had special lenses made that where the edges of the lens were shaved in all sorts of ways, so that when you look at the screen, the scenes shot with those lenses, the outer rims are all distorted and things show up in kind of double and triple version. Okay? Again, you could only see that through cinema. It's not real. It can't be real. So I think this idea that she blocks that by which we see, right? The sun is that by which we see. We don't normally ever see the sun, right? I mean, you can't literally look at the sun, right? You'd go blind, okay? It would kill your capacity to see, right? So we see by the sun, right? We only see what the sun reveals to us. So she's blocking that. She's blocking the source of illumination in the film, right? And yet, in other ways, she's the source of illumination. As if it's like the only way you're going to see is not through literal light, right? Like the sunrise. What you see is not literal, it's not real. But that's, in a sense, where the truth is, right? Is in the cinematic display of light that he gives us. Not real light, in the cinematic representation of the light. So she blocks the real light, right? And yet, she walks into that glowing white room and brings back someone from the dead.
That's it.
And the last one?
Amir is the last one, but since he's not in the room, I will ask somebody else.
So I have a question about the technique you taught. I didn't get really well the fact that you told us how it got shot, the first scene. So he looked at the sky, he put the camera on the sky, and then he turns, while through the whole time of it, I was able to see the ground, right?
Yeah. So the way he, if you're interested in the technical stuff, the way he actually did that scene, he's talked about it in interviews. He says it's the only time it's ever been done in the history of cinema. He invented the technique to capture that scene. So what he did is he did what a tracking shot is. So in cinema, you put the camera on a kind of
track, yeah.
on a track, and
Yeah.
it moves along the track. Okay. So what he did is over the course of an evening, essentially. Okay. He had the camera, and he would turn on the camera, and if, this is the track, right? He would turn on the camera, and he said he would just very, very, very slowly. He did it by himself. Very, very slowly move the camera forward for 5-minute long takes. Okay. Then he'd readjust the camera, because you've got to remember what's happening in the sky is, over time, the stars are moving, right? Which is why stop motion animation wouldn't work, or why speeding up the camera, the film wouldn't work. So he did a series of 5-minute shots, moving the camera very slowly and then readjusting it a little bit so that the landscape was roughly matched to what he just shot, and he would repeat the process. And then he cut it all together, kind of cross-fading the cuts very slowly, so you wouldn't notice that one scene is actually cut into another scene. So it looks like what's called a sequence shot, or a long take.
How many editing it was?
Pardon me?
How many editing? How many?
I don't know. He didn't say how many edits
That's
are, but
interesting.
it's got it. If it's 5-minute takes, a sunset is an hour and a half. I mean, we can probably do the math and get close to the actual take.
That would
But
be a lot.
it looks like a sequence shot. It looks like a long take, but it's actually a series of cuts.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's why I said it's an illusion that looks like you're watching sort of cinematic realism, but it's
Okay.
not.
We go to the last question of this round, and also I pass around this voluntary donation kind of thing.
have a
Donate
lot.
as much as you can. So we go to Amir. Last question.
I wasn't here. I don't know what you're going to ask, so I prefer not.
Is there anybody else who wants to ask questions?
We didn't talk about the Christian symbolism in this. I mean, there was lots to talk about. But yes, she blocks the light and she brings the light. So she's Lucifer, right? In a sense, Lucifer means bringer of the light, right?
Yeah, sure.
So it wasn't God and it was devil.
But Jesus also brings the light.
Something. I mean, if you go into that kind of symbolism about everything, and the kiss of someone who holds the love that can give life.
Sure.
There is stuff like that in the movie. Is that right? I mean,
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, but so yeah, it's interesting comment about Lucifer. But you know, but Christ also brings the light, and Christ resurrects Lazarus from the dead. So she's a Christ-like figure as well. You know, that room is sort of a tomb, right? It's a sort of a resurrection scene. You know, and the door. I don't know if you noticed it. You know, has a kind of cross in the way the patterning of the door works. So she walks into that room, walks out of that room, right? It's like stepping in and out of Christ's tomb in a certain way. But they're all kind of Christ figures in sort of classic literary sense. I mean, the three principal characters, they're all kind of Christ figures.
Perfect. And let's give a round of Thank you. So we're gonna head to our last section with Mark also being with us. So in this section, you could kind of bring up or raise any issues about presentation, anything you watched in the movie that you like. There are two ways to kind of raise these issues: 2 minutes and 30 seconds. 2 minutes is if you want to open up a new discussion. 30 seconds is if you want to exchange ideas with others. So we start from Nassim. 2 minutes.
I had some issues with some scenes. Let's start with that. First, about the representation of body, especially the sex scene. I don't know. I didn't like that. While it's trying to project love type of a style of sex, but I was just seeing all the time animal body, the animal body. Yeah, that was a harsh thing for me, and I didn't at all like it. The other one was also, let's go for swimming. The man said to his wife, and I was just hearing that. Let's go make another child. Like they were children out there just playing around. So the scenes are interesting for me. They didn't actually bring me. They didn't give me that love effect that they should have been project to some extent. Yeah. Any question about that? Do you feel the same thing or not?
We have people, and nothing said yes.
Actually, I quite agree with Nassim that I didn't see any love between the woman and the wife and the husband. I see that the husband he has a dilemma between peace and love. So he loves Mariana, but he loves the peace which he has with his family. He loves the stability. So. In somehow, I didn't see he didn't love both of them.
I have quite contrary idea. I like the love scenes between them. I read some stuff from Judy Foster when he talks about cinema and Hollywood and sex. She argued that every time in the movie in Hollywood we see this love scene, it is only about 20 seconds. It's just about the moment that, for example, man can have, for example, ejaculation. There we can never see feminine sides of sexuality, and I think I love the way that he portrayed, for example, a relationship between these two guys. For example, the kiss that takes lots of time. I see it more feminine, and I read it from this perspective.
Thank you. Does anyone else have a comment? Mark, do you have any comment on this issue? Anybody?
In general, Regatas' depictions of sex are very raw. You know, so I mean, they're sweaty and they're, you know, you see the drops of sweat on their face. It's not very kind of made up Hollywood style. It is very raw.
Is it real? No.
In some of the films it is. So if he's Battle in Heaven, the film previous to Silent Light, famously begins with this young, beautiful, like 22-year-old girl giving oral sex to an obese, middle-aged man. Which goes on for about 5 minutes. It's kind of like the opening of this film. And it's real. And then they have sex in the film, and you have close-ups of her vagina, and yeah, he will film real sex.
Perfect. We go to next. Oh, Spicer, you have this.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that, just like Mark was saying in the presentation, I found that to be just part of the style of the film. You're supposed to be so emotionally detached from the characters, and when you watch a love scene, you're not supposed to feel anything. You're just supposed to like it's like you're reading it somewhere through a mediated, you know, a message. So we just see what happens, but we don't feel.
So, yeah, sure. Okay, just one more thing about that. I mean, I think it's also part of his, it's part of the realism part of his idea, of just that, you know, love is real. It happens between beings who have bodies, who sweat, who don't look like supermodels, who is just real, right? It's real and it's physical. And he's showing you the physicalness of it, right? I mean, that's one thing that people often comment on his films, is the real, you see the bodiliness of people. It's not pretty, it's not made to look like glamorous, right? It's physically, tangibly real, right? And so the miracle doesn't mean you get out of the physical, material, tangible, messy, ugly body. This is all in the body. Right?
It's interesting for me, the sweaty body of that man, for me, it was when he was working in the farm for 3 hours or 4 hours under the sun.
Yeah.
It couldn't be for 20 minutes, even if it's 20 minutes. And a beautiful sheet in a room, and it could be sweaty. I don't feel that real. I don't get that much of sweaty person in front of me when I am doing sex like that much. But anyway, I didn't feel that. I think it's a bit of exaggeration in the way that they are actually acting in terms of sex. Steve.
I want to say, I think the problem of the story is that it's kind of impossible what you try to make, because you are watching this movie about 3 characters that you are supposed to not understand, and you should make this otherness, and we shouldn't identify with one of them. Then the whole message of the film is ruined in a way that, oh, Marianne has the rights, you know. So at the same time, you shouldn't understand none of them, right? But at the same time, they should forgive, and they should be God, and they should act as transcendent, and therefore you won't understand that the relation between them is real or not, right? So in a way that if you understand the relation, then you have to judge who is right, who is wrong, and you know, in that sense. So we are watching a story that there's no intention of showing us the details of it, right? Mm-hmm. So I think it's kind of impossible to make this movie in a way.
One thing that I want to say about the representation of sex is that, as Marky was talking about the realism, if the whole idea of the film is about commitment or the degree to which we could be committed to others, and the context that we were thrown in as an audience, that this is a very kind of religious community, then we cannot expect that we see a rough sex there. I mean, what was shown was that somebody, like a man who was anxious to have a relationship with another person. So that's why I guess it was basically a realist depiction of sex. I don't know how we could expect that this turned out to be something very kind of fancy or kinky. No, we can't expect that. This was the realism of the film. What should we expect as an audience? Something very dramatic, or again, if you can make the argument otherwise, I would be happy to hear that. Okay, we go to the next person, Cyrus.
I'm going to change the subject. I think, although I can understand it's a Mennonite world, but the movie is depicting the woman very weak. If you look at it as a feministic point of view, I feel that, contrary to our friend that said that the woman is showing at the perspective of the woman, but I think it was different. The woman was mostly at the mercy of that man, and didn't show much assertiveness for herself, both of them. And I think there is some objection, in my opinion, in regards to showing the woman so weak.
Actually, I agree with you, but I think they didn't show the weakness of the woman. They show the reality, what happened in the male dominant world. And I was wondering, because in one scene, all of the scenes, the wife was silent, but in the funeral, suddenly all of them start to sing. And I was thinking, why this woman should take this much burden on her until she got heart attack and stay. But the only reason is that I think, yeah, probably the weakness in that term, they didn't have any dependency or independency or this, or having many child or this.
Anyone else on this?
Just to say something feministic about the scene, I think in the regarding the forgiveness in this movie, I think how it could be if the situation was vice versa, and the man was supposed to forgive the woman in the same situation. And I cannot imagine if this director can just direct the movie to show the forgiveness and the beauty of it.
I think in one sense all of the characters are weak, because if you see the film from the perspective that was presented here, I think you would see that we cannot identify with them and cannot understand them. In that sense, yes, there's uncertainty about them, but so I agree that you can see some weakness in all of the characters, and two of the main characters are women. But at the same time, you would see contrary clues in all over the place that the women were very subjective and were not objects at all in the sex. There were, as Amir said, you were seeing the women's face, and they were participating actively, and they were forgiving. And forgiving is a very active, agent. It has agency in it, right? At the same time, that they weren't forgiving. They were loving. They were part of the play, and they were the acting of resurrection. Acting of God is the ultimate of agencies, right? So I think you can see contrary clues. So I don't think a feministic model actually could apply, because you can see both ways.
So because of a shortage of time, I get one more 30 seconds, and then Amir's turn, and then we go to the last round, which is basically picking our best. So sorry for the not giving you the time. Amir is the first.
I think in terms of feminism, the movie seemed politically neutral. Like it tried to stay politically neutral about that issue. So having a feminist understanding of the movie is not really correct, I guess.
Seriously, I give you time afterwards. Yeah, don't worry. I'm here 2 minutes. I want to keep it under. I want to keep it under.
Right up
time.
to subject.
Yes. Amir, go ahead.
One of the biggest issue I have with this film is that I found this movie is a very amalgamation of techniques in different directors. For example, many of the stuff that we talk today about originality are not originality in cinema. For example, when we talk about fat body, or Sidel already showed lots of fat bodies and in the sexual relationships, or Bruno Dumont also use ugly bodies when he wants to depict sexual, or the whole French cinema, extreme French cinema is always showing extremes and violence in representation of sex or everything else. Or for example, time. I don't know, neorealism. We talked about Rossellini, or we talked about other neorealist cinema. They investigate, or they talk, or they represent time a lot in their movies. They always use long takes, many styles that we see here. They have already used them before. Or Antonioni discussed a lot about time. Or when we talk about, for example, that he wants to show us the camera, or he wants to show us, for example, how it is a movie. Antonioni also in his movies always shows aspects of cinema, wants to make us think about cinema. Or Greenaway also. If you look at, for example, Daughter's Man Contract, is all about question that what you see is cinema. Tarkovsky talks about these aspects of transcendental in his works, or Bresson also talks a lot. This movie is something that is just putting together what others have already did. Even his last scene is quotations to Dreyer. It's just, maybe people liked it, but it was, if you know the history of cinema, you will never surprised by seeing this. It appears to me that the movie just picked something interesting stuff from different movies and put them together, and sometimes brings some interesting quote. For example, he says that peace is stranger than love. It just refers to this some interesting quote to make you think how we watch very great movies, but it never try to create any emotion in you. It's just, I think it's I don't know. It's a very good example of postmodernism and why postmodernism art sometimes is pornographic.
Is there any comment on?
No, please don't comment.
Let me just comment on what Amir said. Yeah, it is true that it is a collage of works of different directors, or at least like we can find clues about like the techniques that the others use. But I agree, I think, with Chris that if you watch Terrence Malick movies, so he has this idea of like American rural society and like combining of transcendence and eminence, as Mark was talking about. But this director is bringing it into a new context. So the way that like he was talking about the miracle that is repeated, the theme they repeated in his film. So these are his own novelties. So it's not that let's assume that he bringing all these things and like superficially like put it together. He's giving it a new meaning. So I think within this like reading, it's going to be a little bit more meaningful as you were trying to present. Anybody else on this? Okay, perfect. So we're going to go to the last round. And basically what I'm asking you to do is to tell us about your favorite scene, or the scene that you didn't like, or any last